So just before we begin, I'd just like to formally acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stay. So the lands on which I live and work, and the lands on which all of those that are participating and joining tonight might live and work on. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So tonight we've got our online event, which is hosted by RECREATIONAL Australia and part of our Coast to Coral series that we host on the second Tuesday of every month. And tonight we have the pleasure of having Dr. Vicky Martin, and she is an academic at Queensland, and she'll be talking to us a little bit about the use and social values in Minjerribah or Moreton Bay. But before we begin, I'd just like to introduce RECREATIONAL Australia for anyone that's new and doesn't really know much about us. So we're a citizen science group, mainly run by some staff and a huge body of incredible volunteers. And the organisation is global, but of course tonight we're just representing Australia and in particular the Southeast Queensland part of the organisation. And essentially what we do is collect a lot of hands-on monitoring data through a citizen science model, and this data is collected at several reefs across the east coast of Australia, and it's part of a huge global data set that's used to look at long-term trends in reef health and biodiversity time. And this happens not just on the east coast of Australia, but globally, also on the west coast and up north as well. And then of course, in other countries where we have partners. We also have a huge education side of the organisation where we do a lot of in-person activities, road shows, and sort of attending schools and organisations across the country to kind of spread the word about what we do, but also to help people sort of better understand what they can do on a day-to-day basis to protect and conserve our marine resources. So before we completely underway with tonight's event, I'll just ask that we all just be respectful when our speaker is on and just keep our video and voices on mute as well. If you have any questions, please just pop them in the chat. If you don't feel like putting them out to everyone, you can also just privately message myself or Julie. And at the end of Vicky's talk, we'll just field those questions and have a little bit of an informal chat. If you're not on our mailing list and you'd like to find out more about these types of events and our Coast to Coral series, but so how you might be able to get more involved as a reef check volunteer, we've got our email up on the slides at the moment. There's SEQ surveys at reefcheckaustralia.org. That's probably the best way to get in touch with us, or on any of our social media pages. So we're probably most prominent on Facebook and Instagram as well. And just in the interest of saving time, I'm going to skip on the group photo. So I'm just going to introduce some of our events that are coming up quite soon. So for example, we've got a beach cleanup this Saturday, and that's on the Sunshine Coast. So anyone that's in Southeast Queensland is more than welcome to come and attend that event. We will have some SUPs available for rental, but if you have your own, it'd be great if you could bring those along as well. So it'd be a great way to meet other reef checkers and other people that are part of the community, but also have some fun and do a little bit of good. So that'll be from 3 to 5 p.m. on Saturday at Cotton Tree. And all this information is also on our Facebook page with a little bit more detail, or again, you can email us with the email I mentioned earlier. I'll also pop that into the chat later. On Sundays, we also have the Sundays with Your Mates on the Sunshine Coast. So they're our partner, and we do a lot of raffle draws with them. So that's most Sundays. The most sorry, the ones that are coming up soon is on the 23rd of October, 30th of October, and the 6th of November. And so for any Sunshine Coast locals, this would be just around the corner for you. We also have a really interesting event this month, which is pretty new. So as many of you will know, our RECREATIONAL Australia manager, Jodie Salmond, was actually interviewed as part of the Wildlings podcast. So that podcast is available, I believe, on most streaming platforms, but of course it'll be on Spotify. So keep an eye out for season 3, episode 32, where Jodie talks a little bit about science and sustainable stewardship, and in particular the work that we do as part of RECREATIONAL. And another thing that we have going on at the moment, I'm sorry for the blurry picture, is the Adopt a Reef series. So if you're stuck on Christmas ideas for gifts or birthday gift ideas, we have a really awesome program where you can donate through the RECREATIONAL Australia website and essentially adopt a reef for someone. So given that that picture is quite blurry, just head over to our RECREATIONAL Australia website, and all the information is there. You can also type in adopt a reef RECREATIONAL Australia or something like that on Google, and it's bound to come up. We will also be having another Coast to Coral online event as usual. This time it will be on the second Tuesday of November, so that'll be the 8th of November. As usual, 6:30 p.m, and it'll be on Zoom. We'll be sharing the details about the speaker and the topic for discussion for that night quite soon, likely later this week or early next week. So keep an eye out for that, again, on our mailing list, newsletter, and Facebook. So as usual, if you want to get involved as a volunteer or even just to find out a little bit more about what we do, feel free to even message me on a chat tonight as we listen to Vicky's talk. Email us, get in touch on socials. We're a really friendly bunch and we're always looking for more hands and help. There's lots of ways to get involved. You don't necessarily have to be a marine biologist or student or someone that has sort of technical in-water skills. Of course, there is that part of our organization. So if you do have those skills, let us know, because there are many ways you can get involved and jump in the water, which can be really, really fun. But we also have a lot of ambassadors that get involved, and they're often people that are really great at just getting out into the community. They've got really good, say, social skills or public speaking skills. And it's also a really great way to just get to know like-minded people, or if you are a student and you're involved in the marine sciences, it's just a really great way to, I guess, gain a little bit more confidence and to improve your sort of engagement and science communication skills, which is really invaluable. So we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and just search for RECREATIONAL Australia. That's usually our handle. And of course, before we proceed, I've got to thank so many people that help us host the online events. So we've got a lot of partners, in particular the Sunshine Coast Council and the City of Gold Coast Council. But of course, we've got so many volunteers that also make these events possible. And if you are keen in getting involved in the Coast to Coral series, it's a really easy way to sort of get involved in RECREATIONAL as a volunteer, but you can also do it offline in the sense that it could be, finding speakers and emailing them, or even just hosting the events online. So you don't necessarily have to be based in Southeast Queensland or the Sunshine Coast or Brisbane. And of course, a huge thank you to Jodie and Julia, who are in the picture there. They're our fearless leaders, and they've made tonight and all subsequent Coast to Coral series nights possible. So the moment we've all been waiting for is Vicky's talk. So I have the pleasure of actually working with Vicky at the University of Queensland, and there's a big bio up there, but essentially, she's a social scientist, and we work together on a project in Minjerribah in Kondamuka country. And that project is titled Sustainable Urban Seascapes, Moreton Bay. And essentially, it's very sort of multifaceted, and there's many teams involved. But Vicky's side of the project is really exciting, and she just recently finished a huge amount of field work, and is probably grappling with all that data at the moment. But she's been going out and to a lot of boaters and people who use the bay, whether it's, you know, for recreational use or for work, and having a chat to them about what their values are and what their views are on the bay, and how they use it and why they use it and things like that, which is all really, really important information for many things in conservation and management, like how we might rezone the marine park and things like that. So I'll just hand over to you, Vicky, and just while Vicky's talking, please just, you know, keep your mics on mute just so that we can listen to her tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Ilya. That was a really lovely introduction. I appreciate that. Right, let me get. Ilya said all the introductory stuff, so I appreciate that, and I will move straight into sharing my slides. Yeah, so as Ilya mentioned, I'm an environmental social scientist, and my current work is looking at mapping social values of Moreton Bay. However, I did have the pleasure of getting to know RECREATIONAL very well during my PhD, where I was looking at the potential for more Australians to get involved in marine citizen science. So there's a really lovely connection there too. So as Ilya mentioned, let's see, my slides are not moving forward, just a sec. Here we go. My current project sits within a much bigger project called Sustainable Urban Seascapes, Moreton Bay. And this project is a very interdisciplinary project. So we have some wonderful investigators looking at all sorts of things, from corals to seagrass, sediment, water quality, mangroves, all sorts of stuff. And of course, the people who do a lot of the really hard work, including Ilya, and our other postdocs and research assistants too. So it's a big team, and we're very excited to have had this opportunity to work on Moreton Bay. Now, that project was instigated after a series of workshops with stakeholders in Moreton Bay and discussions with the kayak, the Kondamuka Aboriginal Corporation, who are responsible or hold native title over much of the Moreton Bay area. So those discussions helped us to identify those priority areas, and we synthesised the program of research into three areas. So the first, which is led by John Pandolfi, is all about ecosystem dynamics and biodiversity, and that's the area that Ilya is working in. The second is led by Kath Lovelock. That's all about environmental futures. So there's a lot of the work about blue carbon and mangroves going on in there, as well as that water quality and sediment assessments. And program 3, sustainable management, is led by Carissa Klein, and this is the area that my work is in. So we identified that the marine parks really want to know more about how recreational boaters in particular use and value Moreton Bay. So that's the research question I set out to try and answer. We worked on basically the boundary of the Moreton Bay Marine Park. So in that sense, we mean Moreton Bay is extending from Caloundra in the north right down to the Gold Coast Seaway in the south. So that's a substantial area to cover, of course. Before I tell you about that project in more detail, I want to tell you a brief story about 4 people who love going out on Moreton Bay, boating and fishing. And you'll see why we're talking about these further into the talk. So first of all, we have Jack. Jack really loves his fishing, but for him, it's more about rest and relaxation. And he doesn't care too much about whether he catches a fish or not. He just loves going out there to get away from it all. Then we have Ali, and Ali is mainly going out to catch a feed for his family. So that's his primary motivation for getting out there. Kim is a sports fisher woman. There's arguments over what female recreational fishers like to be called. So Kim is a super keen fisher. She gets out there in all the competitions she can. She takes her husband along. They're part of a club, and for her, it's all about the sport and trying as many trophies as she can. And finally, we have Rowan. Secretly, Rowan doesn't really like fishing very much. He finds them quite slimy and hates taking them off the line. But his father taught him how to fish, and his father's father handed down those skills as well. So he wants to maintain that family tradition, and his primary purpose for going out there is to teach his own kids how to fish. So we'll come back to these 4 people a bit later. But for now, getting back to the project, the aim is to look at which places in Moreton Bay do people value and why. And we're really targeting those recreational vessels that have a motor. And the method that we are using, I should say have used, because we literally finished data collection yesterday, is online surveys. And we've been running these in person and allowing people to do them online in their own time as well. And we're really trying to get this data in before the rezoning of the marine park starts, which is due any time now. There's been some delays to that process starting, but hopefully it will start soon. So you might ask, why are we focusing on recreational vessels? It's mainly because they're obviously an important stakeholder group for marine park management, partly because of their potential for boat strikes on marine megafauna, but also impacts such as anchor damage. But also because recreational boating is increasing on Moreton Bay. So this is a chart of the boats in the Brisbane region. This is the number of boats registered in the Brisbane region, and that little spike you can see is the pandemic. So Southeast Queensland had more than double the state average of increase in new boat registrants over the that pandemic period. So boats are increasing. We also know that the population in the area is increasing. And let's not forget that in 10 years' time, we're going to have the Olympics here right on our shores. And so that means that there's a lot of thought needs to be going into work out how to best manage these areas for environmental sustainability. But working out how to measure values is actually really quite challenging. But it's important to grapple with these challenges because we know what gets measured gets managed. So it's important that we do a good job of this. So some of the challenges that we've seen is that in previous research, there's not been a consistent approach to the methods that have been used. So we need to make some decisions about which way we're going to go and what would be most useful for managers to make decisions on. There's also the challenge of which technology to use. So some research in the past has used paper maps to inform this process, others use digital. So there's pros and cons of each of those methods. There's some real challenges around survey design and the types of platforms, if we're using online platforms to go out and collect this data with, but also usability of the survey is a really big issue as well. And probably the most important issue is working out whose values are we measuring. And more importantly, even, is who are we missing? So we know that there's always bias in these types of surveys or other public participation processes in marine spatial planning. So it's important to try and work out who is not included and try to work out ways to represent their views as well. And finally, there's the challenge of working out what are the social values that we want to measure. How do we define these, and in what way are they important and useful for managers? So how we're grappling with those is, first of all, we're drawing from best practice social science. We're also involving, we have involved the end users in our research design. So that's marine parks and other partners like Maritime Safety Queensland have been involved in developing this research. We've been embracing technologies that the public are far more familiar these days with, some mobile technologies to help us collect this data efficiently. We've been testing, we did some really thorough testing of the survey platform and the survey questions to work out how understandable are our questions, how usable are not just the platform, but the tablets that we took out into the field as well. And we've aimed to get as broad a representation as we can across age, gender, different types of boats, locations, and some other important factors. And in terms of which values we're measuring, what we've done is we've built upon some values frameworks that have a long history of research, so decades of research on how humans value nature and wildlife. But we've also looked at previous qualitative research that's happened in Moreton Bay about social values as well. So one of the particular challenges in the measures is that we've seen in the past, and I've mentioned this inconsistent approach, is that people who've done this research often conflate values, social values, with things like activities. So they might have a list of different types of values and they're asking the respondents to tell them which ones are most important. But they include activities such as fishing or recreation. So if we come back to think about our 4 characters in our story before, if they're all grouped together in a single category, such as recreation or fishing, a decision will be based on the responses to that value for all of them together. However, we know already from their stories that their values, so the reasons why people are going to particular areas to go boating and fishing, are actually very different. And so if you think of it in terms of the consequences of a particular decision, say a very extreme example would be having one area only where all the people could do fishing together, you're going to have a potential for conflict between people doing the same category of activity. So Kim is happy, there's lots of people there, she loves people, she's fishing in her competitions and doing well. Jack's a bit annoyed because he just wanted to get away from it all and there's too many people around. Ali might be quite concerned about whether he's going to be able to continue catching enough fish to feed his family. And Rowan, well, he's probably getting a bit annoyed just in the same way that Jack is. So it's important that we understand how to measure social values well. So this research was conducted in 2 phases. As I mentioned, we went through those pilot interviews. That was to make sure we're getting the wording of the questions right. We're asking people about the different types of values. So that helped us build a more robust framework that was relevant for voters in Moreton Bay. And then in the second phase, we did those in-person surveys. So we took mobile tablets out to boat ramps and boat clubs and other locations. But we also allowed people to do them online. So we used email and other channels to send out the list. And we distributed cards and flyers wherever we could. So if we found a boat ramp full of cars with boat trailers on them, we left a card and a little note for them, telling them a bit about the survey. And on the back of the card, they had a QR code and further details about the survey too, which was actually really quite effective. So we're pleased we went ahead with that. So this is us getting out there. We had a team of 5 each time. We went to many locations over the last 7 weeks and talked to a lot of voters. So in total, we've got just over 340 responses. So we're really pleased with that. And what we're asking them to do in those questions, apart from their general voting questions, was to put a pin on a map and tell us about a favourite place that they enjoy going to. So once they had that location, there was then a series of questions about what they do there, how often they go there, how healthy they think it is, that sort of thing, as well as diving in deeper to those values questions. So we used our values framework and we asked which of those values were relevant to them. And then we gave them a task of assigning 100 points over the different types of values to indicate which values are more important than others. So one value might have 50 points because it's the most important. And then there were, 2 or 3 more that had 30, 20, 10, that sort of thing. So it's a budgeting exercise, essentially. Now, this map here is just to give you a taster of the sort of data that we'll be getting. So this is not for distribution. It's actually, we ran this just a few weeks ago, so before we'd finished the data collection, but it shows you the locations that people told us about. So these are the favourite locations. And as you can see, there's some hot spots around the Tangalooma Wrecks off Moreton Island there, Peel Island and Jumpin' Now this aligns really well with what Marine Parks were saying are the hot spots for them. But as yet, they hadn't got good data on where people are going. Just as a side note, we're also collaborating with some researchers doing some pretty cool stuff over at QUT, where they're developing AI to count, identify and count recreational boats from satellite images. So that will give us more data about where people are going, and we can look at how well this survey data matches up with that. And then our values questions can really get at why people choose those places and what's special about those. So I just literally an hour ago downloaded the final data set and had a quick look at the most common types of values that were selected. So I'm just showing you the top few here to give you a bit of an idea of what people are telling us. However, before I show you, I just want you to think about what's your idea of what motorboaters, for example, think of the bay. When you think of motorboaters, are you thinking that they're hoons? We have jet skiers in here too, they don't care about the bay terribly much. They just want to drive around as fast as they can. Or do you have something else in mind? The reason I asked that is that during our workshops, I heard one of our stakeholders say, we just have to get people to value the bay the same way we do. And we know from some past surveys that people do actually value the bay very much. So it's interesting to just check our assumptions about what people value. So the top one was actually this concept of appreciating the natural beauty of this place. So that's 94% of our respondents said that. So this is out of 342 responses. The second highest value was experiencing nature. So 90% of our respondents said that. Third, it's for our own self, like a therapeutic reasons. So rest and relaxation, getting away from it all, that sort of idea. So 85% said this is a value for them of going to the place that they chose. Sharing the experience with other people. Well, you wouldn't necessarily necessarily think of that as a value for boating on the bay, but it's really high. So over 3/4 of our respondents mentioned that. A sheer love of the place. So feeling a deep bond or attachment to this natural area, that was chosen by 2/3 of our respondents. And finally, useful or practical reasons. So that's nearly 60%. So this is things like, so they're saying, I value this place that they chose for easy access or good distance or, good numbers of fish, that sort of thing. So if you look through and think through these different types of values, what you can start to think about is how we might change the way that we communicate with the public about conservation and management issues in the bay. So, for example, we might want to focus more on the fact that they love going out there for rest and relaxation. So we could think about ways that we might connect that with conserving the area so that they can continue to get that rest and relaxation as well. So it's a very different way of messaging and thinking about people's connections to Moreton Bay, rather than we've just got to protect it for, the wildlife or, for nature. There might be other more interesting and effective ways of communicating stewardship with the public there. Anyway, so just to wrap up, we have a hard deadline of end of December, so we're going to be very busy over the next few weeks writing up, analysing and writing up all of our findings and doing presentations and talks. We're returning this information back to the community and the stakeholders in this research. And I'd like to thank you very much for your time tonight and welcome any questions. I'd love to hear what you're interested in. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. That was really, really great getting to hear how you guys actually did the field work and see some of those preliminary findings. Is really cool. So for anyone that does want to any questions, feel free to just send myself a message or Julie. I can field those questions to Vicky. Given that we are quite a group as well, feel free to turn your mics and cameras on and ask them directly as well. But while everyone's brainstorming, I guess one thing, because it's so different to sort of the type of data that we collect, how do you sort of account for some of those biases in the actual data collection? So, where the sites that you might go and biases and like the types of groups that you get information from.
Yeah, exactly. So what we struck as a really big challenge straight up was that we have really good data on who the boat registrants are, so motorized boats, motorboats. We don't have good data on who owns sailboats in Moreton Bay, or any sort of boats that have the really small horsepower and aren't required to be registered. And then, as Maritime Safety Queensland pointed out too, even if you know a lot about the registrants, they're not necessarily the people who are boating. So, for example, some people own a boat, but they let their adult children use them, for example. And then, of course, there's all the passengers that they take with them too. So we quickly had to throw out plans of doing some quota-based sampling, because we had really good data from MSQ about, how many registrants are in different age groups and gender and all that sort of thing. So in the end, we've done what's called convenience sampling. So we're just getting as many people through as many channels as we can to answer the survey. And initially I was a bit worried that we'd get too many through the boat clubs and not enough of people who have nothing to do with boat clubs, but that hasn't turned out to be the case. So We can compare that data with some other data that's been collected regularly, such as the Healthy Land and Water social surveys. So that tells us a little bit about who goes voting in the region, but not necessarily whether they're voting on Moreton Bay. And we can compare our data against, for example, the census data to see, how our sample compares against the population in Southeast Queensland. So we'll get a bit of an idea of how far we're off. We have questions in there such as their income to get an idea of, are we getting mostly wealthy people or not so wealthy people, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Super interesting. And I guess, I don't know if I should even ask this question, but what are sort of the next steps once you've collated all this data and analyzed it? How hard is it to sort of take it to Healthy Land and Water or DES and try and use it to influence, say, the rezoning coming up and stuff like that?
Well, I don't think it's hard to take it to them. They're the ones who wanted DES and Marine Parks wanted the information in the first place. So we know that they're really keen to see the results. And my argument has been that it's better to know this sort of information, the social information, before they make decisions about areas, especially if they're looking at making any changes that might influence or impact on people's enjoyment or use of different areas. So what we are hoping to find is areas where there might be not only potential for conflict if there's change in use, but also potential for mutual interests, like people coming together to support change. And what we've seen in a lot of the open-ended responses, we had a bit of a deep dive into those over the weekend, and we could see that there's actually quite a strong push for protection and management, looking after the place, along with some obvious need for more infrastructure in certain areas and facilities, that sort of thing. Yeah. So,
well, have a look at the chats quickly. So it doesn't look like anyone has asked any questions. So what we'll do is maybe just hang on here for another couple of minutes to see if anyone does want to stay and chat or ask any more questions. But that's pretty much everything we have for tonight. So if anyone doesn't have any questions, feel free to leave the Zoom meeting. And I've put the SEQ surveys email in the chat. So if you do have any questions from anything that we discussed tonight, reef check related, or even if you want to get in touch with Vicky, just pop them in those emails and we can get you in touch with the right people as well. But just on behalf of Reef Check Australia, thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight. And of course, thank you to Vicky for presenting this work, which is really exciting.
Thanks, Ilya. Thanks for having me.